There's a quiet tension running through Monster Hunter Wilds that you can feel long before the story ever names it. It isn't the tension of a new flagship monster. It isn't even the tension of the Forbidden Lands storms. It's something more human and more uncomfortable. The kind of tension you get when an institution walks into a place pretending it's innocent and new, even though its footsteps land like someone returning to a crime scene. You're told this expedition is about rescue. Bring Nata home. Investigate the White Wraith. Map the uncharted East. That's the clean, heroic surface. But if you've been following the breadcrumbs with me so far, the machine world phases, the ancient purge floods, the Guardian layer, Arkveld as a malfunctioning failsafe, then you already know something doesn't add up. The Guild doesn't behave like an organization stumbling into discovery. It behaves like an organization reopening a file it never wanted the public to read. Tonight, that's our puzzle. What was the Guild really doing in the Forbidden Lands? What did they already know? And why does the Avis unit feel like the first move of a story the world has lived through before? Because once you peel away the hero framing, Wilds becomes a much sharper narrative. A modern institution stepping into the ruins of Wyveria, trying to fix a machine world with the very instincts that once broke it. Before we jump in, quick and heartfelt pause. If you're enjoying this long-form Wilds season and you want the next episodes to keep dropping at this full length, a like and a subscribe genuinely help a lot. It keeps these videos alive in the algorithm and makes it possible to keep telling Monster Hunter stories this slowly and this deep. And please tell me what other games or series you'd want covered next in this style. I'm lining up future arcs as we speak, and your comments shape that roadmap directly. All right, let's talk about the Guild. Start at the beginning again, but not with Nata. Start with the Guild's reaction to Nata. A child is found in a wasteland the old world claims has been uninhabited for 2,000 years. He says his people live there. He says they were attacked by a pale wyvern the Guild has on record as extinct. That should be one of those moments where a bureaucracy stalls, debates, argues about budgets and politics, questions whether the witness is reliable. Monster Hunter worlds are big, and the Guild is famously cautious about committing major resources on rumors alone. Wilds doesn't show that caution. It shows immediate mobilization, not a scout refresh, not a small diplomatic escort, a full field cell designed for long-term operation, a top-tier hunter, a handler with authority, a smith engineer who can fabricate and maintain infrastructure in the field, Palico, support, and a mission objective that isn't peek and withdraw, but return the witness and investigate the threat at source. The unit is named, funded, and deployed like a plan already waiting on a trigger. That is the first uncomfortable truth of Episode 8. The Guild was ready for this. You can argue that readiness means the Guild is efficient. But readiness at this scale usually means the institution already had a contingency draft in the drawer. It already considered the possibility that the Forbidden Lands were not empty. It already considered the possibility that Arkveld might still exist. It already considered the possibility that the East was not merely a blank map. Because organizations don't build special units for surprises unless those surprises are the kind they've feared for a long time. Now think about what you learn later. The Forbidden Lands aren't uncharted wilderness. They are the corpse of Wyveria's machine world. The Evertorch grid still leaks. The land spine still pulses. Guardian constructs still wake. Arkveld is a fail-safe weapon on a blind loop. The storms and purges are stabilizer layers misfiring. It's a legacy disaster zone still running its old emergency logic without steering. If you are the Guild and you know even a fraction of that history, the Forbidden Lands are not the next frontier. They are the last frontier we promised never to touch again. So the second uncomfortable truth follows. The Guild's silence about the Forbidden Lands wasn't ignorance. It was policy. Maybe inherited across centuries, maybe reframed, maybe softened into myth, but policy all the same. That policy makes sense in context. The Guild exists in part because the old world learned a lesson from ancient overreach. Don't exploit bioenergy recklessly. Don't weaponize monsters as tools. Don't terraform ecosystems into controlled machines. Don't build an empire on the assumption that nature can be leashed. Wyveria violated every one of those rules. Then it died for it. The Guild is what a civilization builds when it wants to survive that kind of lesson without forgetting it. So, if the Guild kept the Forbidden Lands sealed for 2,000 years, it likely wasn't because they forgot where they were. It was because they knew what was there, at least in outline, and they feared what reopening it meant. Now, it's easy to say the Guild feared danger for the public, but institutions rarely fear danger in the abstract. They fear danger that threatens legitimacy, stability, and control. The Forbidden Lands threaten all three. They threaten legitimacy because they prove the Guild's current world order is built on selective memory. If the Keepers survive 2,000 years without the Guild's philosophy, then the Guild's story about the world's history becomes incomplete at best, false at worst. It would have to explain why it labeled a living continent empty. That kind of explanation is never clean. They threaten stability because Wyveria's machine world is not dead. If the grid is still active, then the source of the ancient catastrophe is still active. If the public learns that infinite energy and artificial monsters once existed and might still be accessible, the temptation to replicate Wyveria would explode. The Guild's entire raison d'etre would be tested. They threaten control because the Guild doesn't fully understand the machine world anymore. Even if it remembers the outline of Wyveria's fall, it doesn't have living experts in the old systems. The Keepers do. The land itself does. That shifts power away from the Guild's monopoly on ecological knowledge. So the Don't Go East policy wasn't just a quarantine, it was an institutional firewall. Which brings us to the Avis unit. The Avis unit is framed early as a rescue and investigation cell. But if you watch how it behaves, a second mission bleeds through: assessment. The unit isn't merely hunting Arkveld, it's studying the phases, it's testing how Wilk behaves, it's mapping landspine exposure points, it's documenting Guardian variants, it's gathering data on Keepers' survival practices. It's effectively doing a full systems audit on a continent the Guild has avoided for centuries. That is not the kind of escalated mission you launch just because a child is missing. It's the kind you launch because the quarantine is failing, and you need to know how bad it is. Think about the timing. Nata doesn't show up during a calm era. He shows up during escalating storms, during harsher red water purges, during an apex ladder accelerating to the point Arkveld wakes. The machine world's emergency layers are firing more often. If the Guild has any long-term monitoring at all, distant surveys, old logs, oral histories, or even just rumors flowing back through traders and ship captains, it would have been hearing, something is changing in the east. So Nata isn't a random catalyst. He is a perfect excuse. A human reason to re-enter a forbidden zone without admitting the deeper institutional panic behind it. That's a normal move for a bureaucracy under pressure. You don't say, we're reopening Wyveria because our older quarantine is about to collapse and we need to prevent a second apocalypse. You say, we're saving a child and investigating a threat. Both can be true, but one is the public face and one is the strategic spine. So now our picture clarifies, the Avis unit is a rescue cell on paper and a reconnaissance audit in practice. But Episode 8 isn't only about what the Guild is doing, it's about why that doing feels dangerously familiar. Because everything about this mission rhymes with Wyveria's first steps. Wyveria didn't collapse overnight. It didn't wake up one morning and decide to build an infinite energy torch and an army of living weapons. It started with exploration and rescue and good intentions too. It found something powerful in its land. It built tools to manage it. Those tools worked. That success pushed it toward bigger tools. Bigger tools pushed it toward bigger confidence. Bigger confidence pushed it toward control. Control pushed it into overreach. Overreach pushed it into collapse. If you compress that into a simple human arc, it's this: problem, arrow, tool, arrow, success, arrow, expansion, arrow, hubris. The Guild is now walking into the Forbidden Lands with a problem: Arkveld and phase instability, a set of tools, hunters, engineers, research, and institutional authority, and a mission that will almost certainly produce early success. If you're honest, you can feel how tempting that path is. You already see the Guild sliding into the first steps. It's bringing more infrastructure into the east. It's field testing gear that adapts to the machine world. It's learning how to influence phases. It's studying Wilk as a resource. It's reclassifying artificial monsters as hunt targets. It's beginning to act not purely as a conservationist body, but as a management authority over a legacy system. When an institution begins to manage a system, it begins to believe it can own it. That isn't accusation. It's inertia. You can't walk into a machine world and stay purely neutral. The act of hunting there is already an act of intervention. The act of mapping there is already a step toward governance. The act of stabilizing there is already a step toward control. So, Episode 8 is asking you to see a timely moral hazard. The Guild is not evil, but its mission contains the seed of the same overreach that killed Wyveria. This is why Wilds feels more tense than older Monster Hunter narratives. In older games, the Guild is a steady moral anchor. It's the thing keeping the human world functional. In Wilds, the Guild becomes a player in a legacy system that might change it. Now, the game itself doesn't render the Guild as villains. It makes them sympathetic, competent, and often right about immediate threats. So we need to be careful to separate two things: intention and structure. The intention of the Guild in Wilds is survival and balance. They want to protect the Keepers, prevent Arkveld-scale disasters, and keep the Forbidden Lands from detonating into a continent-wide crisis. But the structure they are using to do that is the same structure of force and management that Wyveria used: hunters as intervention tools, engineers as infrastructure builders, research as a pipeline toward mastery, authority as a claim over decision-making. That's not wrong in the old world, where the Guild's philosophy evolved to prevent overreach. But in the machine world, that structure can become a feedback amplifier if it isn't guided by humility. This is where the Keepers become terrifyingly important in Episode 8. The Keepers represent the one surviving cultural memory that says, we lived through overreach, we chose restraint, we survived without rebuilding the old tools. Their entire way of life is a break on temptation. They are not anti-hunter by nature, they are anti-hubris by history. And Wilds makes sure the Avis unit is constantly exposed to that restraint. Nata's fear of misplaced strength, the chime-based negotiation culture, the villages built around phase prediction rather than phase forcing. The refusal to tap the grid's energy as fuel, even though it could transform their quality of life. If the Guild is smart, it will treat the Keepers not as a tribe to protect, but as teachers of a philosophy the Guild desperately needs in the East. Because in a machine world, the usual hunting mantra, restore balance by force, can accidentally trigger deeper failsafes. Episode 4 and 6 already showed us that. The stabilizer layers are indifferent to moral framing. They respond to dominance spikes and energy hoarding, not to heroic hunts. So in practice, the Guild is a student here whether it likes it or not. This leads to an important emotional thread for your viewers. The true alliance in Wilds isn't hunters and keepers versus monsters. It's humility versus hubris across both human cultures. Nata's arc is a bridge. He is a keeper child learning to trust a hunter, and a hunter team learning to think like keepers. He is, symbolically, the resource Wyveria never had, a living cultural break on overreach. The Avis unit might be the first human group in 2,000 years capable of entering Wyveria's legacy without wanting to become Wyveria, but might isn't a guarantee, it's a tension. Now, let's look at specific details of the Avis unit that reinforce this reading, because Wilds is thoughtful about its character design in a way older games often weren't. Alma, the handler, isn't a wide-eyed cheerleader. She is calm, analytical, and constantly attentive to ecological consequence. That framing matters because handlers in Monster Hunter represent the Guild's mind. In Wilds, the Guild's mind is cautious, not triumphant. Gemma, the smith engineer, is also not framed as a conquest builder. She's framed as a problem solver under constraint, aware she's working in a place whose infrastructure once caused ruin. She doesn't show the reckless joy you'd expect from someone discovering infinite energy relics. She shows careful fascination with an undertone of, this got people killed once. Fabius, the expedition lead, carries gravitas and restraint. He feels like an institutional memory in human form, someone who understands that re-entering the East is morally and historically serious. Even your hunter feels less like a conquest hero and more like a field surgeon. You're operating on a system, not capturing trophies in a new arena. These character tones matter because they suggest the Guild knows it is stepping into a legacy zone. The Guild's leadership is not naive about the risk of repeating Wyveria. That's a good sign. But knowledge doesn't automatically stop momentum. Institutions can understand a hazard and still be pulled toward it by success and necessity. So we're looking at a slow burn question over the last third of Wilds. Can the Guild act inside a machine world without becoming a machine world empire? Now, let's widen the lens to the Guild's historical posture, because Wilds invites you to re-evaluate it. For years, Monster Hunter lore has treated the Guild as a conservationist authority. It controls hunts, discourages environmental destruction, bans certain tech, and frames hunters as protectors rather than conquerors. That posture makes even more sense once you understand Wyveria. The Guild's rules are a cultural immune response to ancient overreach. The Guild is basically a civilization saying, we will survive by restraint and regulation, not by chasing infinite power. So why would the Guild re-enter the East now? Because restraint has a cost. If the Forbidden Lands stabilizer is failing fast enough, not re-entering would mean allowing a second collapse to radiate outward. And the Guild is responsible for the whole world, not just the East. It can't let a machine world detonation happen unobserved. So the Guild's move is not greed-driven on paper, it's catastrophe prevention-driven. But catastrophe prevention is one of the most seductive moral justifications for interventionism. In history, empires often grow under the banner of, we had no choice, we had to stabilize the crisis. Wyveria likely told itself that too. This is why Episode 8 matters. Wilds doesn't want you to hate the Guild. It wants you to feel the uneasy truth that good intentions are not a shield against systemic repetition. When you have the capacity to intervene, you will be tempted to intervene more. When intervention works, you will be tempted to expand it. When expansion works, you will begin to believe the system is yours to tune. That is the Wyverian arc. So, to keep our arc honest, we have to ask, what would it look like if the Guild started repeating Wyveria? It would look like 3 early moves. First, growing dependency on Wilk and grid resources, not for villages necessarily, but for the Guild's own expedition, research, and gear development. The moment you start using the machine world's fuel, you start living in its logic. Second, normalizing guardians as manageable assets rather than hazardous relics. If hunters begin to see artificial monsters as just another bestiary tier, the ethical shock dulls. This makes it easier to imagine building your own artificial assets later. Third, shifting from studying phases to attempting to manipulate phases. Once you learn the rules of a machine, the next human urge is to optimize it. Wilds deliberately flirts with these moves without showing full commitment to any of them. You feel the temptation, you see the capability, but you also see restraint. That's what makes the story tense, rather than preachy. It's a conflict in motion, not a verdict. And now, here's where we reconnect this to Guardians and Arkveld, because the machine world itself is part of the moral hazard. The stabilizer doesn't distinguish between Wyverian intervention and Guild intervention. It distinguishes between dominant spikes and energy flow distortions. If the Guild stabilizes the land too forcefully, it could inadvertently activate deeper failsafes again. Arkveld is one failsafe. Generic Guardians are another. Zoshia is the last layer. So the Guild's mission isn't just socially dangerous, it's mechanically dangerous. The system might interpret fixing as threatening. That makes the Forbidden Lands a genuinely alien governance problem. You can't just hunt your way to peace here. You have to hunt in a way that doesn't trigger the old defense ladder. You have to stabilize without escalating. You have to solve a machine world with a human conscience, which is why the Keepers are not optional. They're essential. Their chime-based way of life is essentially the opposite of Wyveria's logic. It says, listen to the pulse, don't grab it. If the Guild is going to survive the East without repeating the ancient collapse, it needs to internalize that philosophy. And Wild stages that internalization through the relationship between Nata and the Avis unit. Every time the Guild stops to watch Keeper practice, every time it hesitates before forcing a solution, every time it tolerates uncertainty instead of stamping certainty over it, you feel a different possible future for the world. Episode 8's hopeful thread is this. Wilds is possibly showing the birth of a third path in Monster Hunter history. Wyveria was the path of dominance by engineering. The Old World Guild was the path of dominance by regulated hunting. The Keepers are the path of survival by listening. A third path would blend Guild capability with Keeper humility, a way to intervene only as much as needed, with a deep awareness of the machine world's emotional and mechanical hazards. If Wilds is moving toward anything like redemption for the ancient catastrophe, it's moving toward that blend. But redemption in Monster Hunter is never clean. The world is too violent, too alive, too easily destabilized, so the third path will be tested hard. Now, let's address a counter-reading for Episode 8, because not everyone will buy the Guild knew more than it admitted interpretation. A skeptic could say, the Guild mobilized fast simply because Arkveld was an extinction-level threat and Nata was a rare witness. The Avis unit was built for speed, not because of pre-existing secrets. The uncharted for 2,000 years story was honestly held. The Guild was just wrong. Everything else is hindsight. That's a fair reading if you only look at the opening act. But out, it struggles to explain the guild's tone and staffing choice. Even without explicit exposition, Wilds shows you an institution that is not surprised by the category of what it finds. It is surprised by details, yes, but not by the idea that the East hides dangerous legacy. Their reaction feels like, "We feared this might be true," not "We never imagined this." It also struggles with how quickly they accept Nata's claims as actionable. Institutions don't treat extinct monster in Forbidden Land as credible without some internal context pushing the probability up enough to act. So the skeptic reading is possible, but the institutional behavior of the guild still leans toward inherited awareness and long-held contingency. Which leads us to the clean takeaway of Episode 8. The Avis unit is not just a rescue party, it's the guild reopening Wyveria's quarantine under the cover of a rescue. The guild's intentions are protective, but its structure and success risk repeating the same arc that once destroyed an energy empire. The Keepers are the cultural break that might prevent that repetition, if the guild listens. That's the emotional and political heart of Wilds. Humans trying to solve a legacy they didn't create without becoming the legacy themselves. Now, we close by sharpening the question that naturally follows. If the guild is walking a tightrope between prevention and repetition, then the next major lore beat is not, what monster do we fight next? It's what choice does the land force on the guild when the stabilizer's ladder reaches its final rung? Because by now, you can feel it. The emergency layers are escalating, storms intensify, red purges intensify, apex ladders accelerate, Arkveld roams, Guardian units wake more often. These are all signs of a system moving toward a full reset condition. And if Wyveria's final reset condition once produced Zoshia, then the question becomes terrifyingly simple. What happens when the machine world decides the guild itself is part of the imbalance?